Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks fell to a one-week low today. Investors, of course, are wary as tensions between the US and China continue to rise. Also, rising coronavirus cases around the world continues to weigh on sentiment. As a result, we saw MSCI's index for developing world stocks dropping about 1.6% today, and that's after rising in the previous session. Now, the index is now on track for its first weekly decline in 3 weeks. In South Africa, the JSE headed south today with declines from global miner Anglo American certainly weighing on the bourse. Of course, Anglo American posted an 18% decline in overall second quarter output, of course, due to coronavirus lockdowns. Now, also coming up on today's show, nominees for the position of World Trade Organization Director General meet the General Council. Ethiopia attributes rising water levels at the Grand Renaissance Dam to natural forces. And a Tunisian company has unveiled its first drone to operate in agriculture and other domains. Now, 8 nominees to succeed the World Trade Organization's current Director General, Roberto Azevedo, have been meeting WTO members in the General Council. Now, the candidates include Dr. Jesus Kuri of Mexico, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala of Nigeria, Abdel Hamid Mahmoud of Egypt, Theodore Ulyanov Shi of Moldova, Yu Myung-hee of the Republic of Korea, and Amina Mohammed of Kenya, as well as Mohammed Mawa Idri of Saudi Arabia and Dr. Liam Fox of the United Kingdom. Now, Azevedo steps down on 31st August 2020. The second phase of the process, in which the candidates make themselves known to members, will end on 7th September. Then the third phase will begin. The chair of the General Council, together with the chairs of the Dispute Settlement Body and, of course, the Trade Policy Review Body, will start to consult with all WTO members in order to assess their preferences and, of course, seek to determine which candidate is best placed to attract consensus support. Now, the third phase will last no more than 2 months.
Need an institution that can promote a rules-based system. Remember the trade wars, I would say to him, of the past? We don't want that. We want peace and security and stability. That is why the WTO is needed, with its ability to arbitrate disputes within members. So don't leave now. Let's try to fix what needs fixing. And if we didn't have the WTO, we would have to invent it. That's what I'd say to him.
The bilateral tensions between the U.S. and China, in my view, should be resolved in the WTO. The WTO should be seen as part of the solution, not part of the problem. And also we have to keep in mind that since we all believe in the multilateral system, and I believe that the U.S. does believe in the multilateral system, as well as China, then we also have to keep in mind that bilateral tensions do not only have bilateral effects. And bilateral solutions would have ramifications for others as well.
So you have crisis in the WTO, a ministerial conference happening after 4 years, change of director general. So for all those reasons, I think this needs to be done as quickly as possible. And if I could decide, I would say, please, members, decide by this weekend who is. Because we need all the time to work towards the next ministerial and not to think of the United States elections. Whatever it is, we'll work with that. It's a very important member. We'll work with them.
Well, let's head over to Ethiopia now. The government there says water levels at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile River have increased from about 525 meters to 560 meters. Now, this comes a day after talks with Sudan and Egypt on the giant hydroelectric project stalled. Ethiopian officials noted that the increase in water levels is natural due to the construction process. Tensions in the Nile River basin continue to loom after Egypt and Sudan expressed concern over the restriction of vital water supplies. Now, Ethiopia has long intended to fill in the dam during the rainy season. However, Cairo and Khartoum are pushing for the three countries to first reach an agreement on how it will be operated. The dam is expected to have an installed capacity of about 6,450 megawatts upon completion, more than doubling Ethiopia's existing capacity.
Now this year we increased the level of the dam from 525 meters to 560 meters. 525 is the minimum threshold, and now that it is the rainy season, it will surpass that level. And soon it will surpass the 560 meters. It will not go below 560 meters. Once it has reached 560 meters, it will not go below that. The construction of the dam and the filling of the water go hand in hand.
Well, let's now get the latest on this. We're joined by Adel El Marhoui. He is in Egypt, and of course, Girum Achala in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Well, Adel, let's start off with you. Ethiopia certainly is insisting that it's not deliberately filling the dam. Instead, it's pointing to heavy rainfall or natural forces. Are Egypt and Sudan satisfied with this explanation?
Well, they're still trying to get an official response. First of all, there was contradicting news from Ethiopian and state media about deliberately filling or closing the gates of the dam, which means a deliberate filling of the reservoir, or it's due the heavy rainfall because it's the rainy season. And because of that contradicting media reports, the Egyptian Foreign Ministry has officially requested an urgent update from the Ethiopian government and is still waiting for an official response, or at least till now it has not announced, Cairo has not announced that it has received the official response from Ethiopia yet. There are some satellite imaging that confirm that the water is rising in the reservoir. It seems within a reasonable range to justify rainfall, not closing the gates or deliberate filling of the reservoir. However, Sudan has reported a drop in the water levels in the Nile, an indication that really contradicts with the rainy season and entering the flood season as well.
Well, Girum, what is Ethiopia's position in all of this? We know the state television did announce on Wednesday that the filling of the dam had started. What, of course, are the latest developments on the construction of the dam and the progress made as well?
Uche, the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has its own structures, very defined, and there is a natural process where when the dam reaches at a certain level, a reservoir filling process should begin. Now, that, according to the minister, Seleshi Bekele, the Irrigation, Water, Energy Minister, has coincided with the rainy season at the moment, and whatever satellite image that has been circling around the world media houses or social media can be justified with the fact that this rainy season is contributing for the water level to rise to have 560 meters that has been explained at this rainy season that should be reached. So yes, the water is getting into the reservoir, and 4.9 billion metric cubes of water is expected to be held at this rainy season. By the way, hydrologists are also talking about it, and experts will also tell you that at this time around, the rainy season is heavier than those before it, 3 years before it. So the natural process is the one that Ethiopia is emphasizing, that the dam is at a level at the time where the construction itself is allowing it to contain water. So whatever flood that is coming due to the heavy rains is being accumulated in the reservoir. But naturally, Ethiopia is also anticipating with its original plan before the talks, the African Union late talks, that although there is a discussion that is being held in the last 2 weeks, whether there is an agreement or not, the country will proceed in filling the dam. And there is an intention of starting to produce about 700 megawatts of power out of the first stage of filling the reservoir itself. So somehow it is now the idea is the rainy season is contributing for the accumulation of the water, but Ethiopia in the first place never said that it will never fill the dam. But the contentious issue is the sequence, the timing of filling the dam, where Egypt is saying more than 20 years, Ethiopia is saying 7 years is enough. So the filling process, one way or another, seems to be happening, whether it's a natural cause or Ethiopia's plan.
Well, this recent event seemed to have renewed tensions between the two countries and Ethiopia. Adele, Egypt and Sudan have, of course, been pushing for an agreement or consensus on how the dam will be operated. We know the last negotiations ended without an agreement. So how is this latest event likely to impact that process?
Well, Egypt is still trying to pursue negotiations, as well as does Sudan. Both governments in this week have confirmed that they will still try to keep all possible political processes to make sure that they reach an agreement. What is the political path? That's another debate. There is recommendations for Egypt to resort once again back to the United Nations Security Council. But both countries insist that dialogue should be the way forward. However, the tone that we've seen, especially from Sudan today, is that it has slammed or accused Ethiopia of unilateral movement, and it's sort of a change in the behavior that we've been seeing from Sudan, which has been the most tolerant, if I may say, in these dialogues so far. What else can they make? Both countries, they want to have to be part of the management or at least to supervise the management of and the operation of the dam, so that they can more or less guarantee that the water that comes for them as downstream countries is not affected, that the water levels do not drop, and that their share in the Nile water is not affected, which to both countries is a matter of life and death, especially that Sudan, at least northern Sudan, and Egypt are more or less dry countries, and they have very little rainfall, and there is really almost no other alternative to fresh water than the River Nile.
Well, Girum, where is Ethiopia's government on those talks? Is it willing to come back to the table and, of course, remedy especially these recent events?
Uche, first of all, with regards to the idea of affecting the riparian countries, more particularly Sudan and Egypt, Ethiopia's intention has been clear, and this is according to the officials even I spoke to today, saying that time and again the country has been explaining itself, even providing the roadmap of building and finishing the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, saying that we have no intention, Ethiopia has no intentions of harming significantly any riparian country, more specifically the two countries which are now in the negotiating table. So the intention is not that. The intention is we have been sidelined due to, one, the colonial agreement of the 1950s, which left Ethiopia literally to zero level of beneficiation from the Nile waters and gave the other two countries the most of the beneficiation. Time has come that Ethiopia, 60 plus million of its people are accessing no electricity at the moment, and the development factor is also being affected because it's not utilizing its natural waters. Now, the idea is let's use this water together. There is no way that a country can affect riparian countries, none of them at the same time, even in the name of African solidarity. That's the intention that we are hearing from Ethiopian authorities, Uche, at the moment. But then again, even at this time around, Ethiopia wants to come back to the negotiating table, and as soon as possible, by the way. The resorting of the situation to the UN Security Council was not accepted in the first place. Why? Because Ethiopian authorities, even the Prime Minister, believes that this is an African problem and needs an African solution. That's why African Union-led negotiations must continue as they are. The UN Security Council could be related with this matter, but not the priority area to resolve this matter. So Ethiopia wants to come back to the negotiating table. But one hiccup that can be mentioned, and has been mentioned by the minister himself to be more specific, Uche, is any article that could be incorporated in the negotiation terms or any deal that could be signed in a near future should not imply the long-term beneficiation of Ethiopia or its citizens from the Nile waters, as it has been done in the 1950s colonial agreement. Mutual beneficiation, if that is the motto of our agreement, yes, we'll come back to the negotiating table and anything is possible. One. The last and the most important point Ethiopia is raising is that Egypt, more particularly, is asking for a stake, some sort of role in the operation of the Grand Renaissance Dam, in the administration part of it, let alone the other thing. But Ethiopia is saying, look, this is an Ethiopian dam being built by no other country's contribution but those Ethiopians, poor, young or old or whichever. So our dam should be administered by ourselves. But remember, we can sign an agreement that is guaranteeing Egyptians or Sudanese that no significant harm will be caused because of the construction of the dam. Rather, we're going to benefit even from the electricity that is going to be generated out of it. So win-win is the only way forward, is Ethiopia's intention. And yes, to answer your question, Ethiopia is ready to return to the table with the preconditions that I've just talked about.
Right. Well, it certainly looks like there's some tough negotiations up ahead. Many thanks to both of you for your insights. Of course, that's Adel El Marhoui joining us there in Egypt and Girum Chala in Ethiopia. Well, let's move on now to some of our corporate headlines today. Total's liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique has received as much as $16 billion in funding. This is despite a slowdown in energy investment as the coronavirus hammers the global economy. The African Development Bank is expected to provide about $400 million in senior loans. The Japan Bank for International Cooperation also signed a loan agreement for as much as $3 billion for the scheme in northern Mozambique. And global miner Anglo American is set to ramp up production of metals and diamonds in a bid to hit the full year targets, which it set in spring. This comes as the firm reported a sharp slump in second quarter output, which was caused by the coronavirus. The targets are, however, dependent on the course taken by the pandemic, as a drought in Chile affecting its largest copper mine shows little signs of abating. Meanwhile, the African Export-Import Bank has finalized a support package estimated at $3.9 billion for Egyptian institutions. The package includes $3.55 billion for the Central Bank of Egypt and other Egyptian banks to help manage the impact of COVID-19 on the nation. It also includes $300 million to the National Bank of Egypt in order to help bolster activities which are aimed at expanding intra-African trade. And a series of high-profile Twitter accounts were hijacked in an alleged Bitcoin scam. These included former U.S. President Barack Obama, Democratic presidential frontrunner Joe Biden, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, as well as Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates and Tesla CEO Elon Musk. Now, the accounts, amongst other prominent handles like Kanye West and Kim Kardashian West, posted similar tweets soliciting donations via digital currency to their verified profiles. Twitter has since resolved that matter. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's take a short break now. Still coming up on the show. We take a closer look at what the COVID-19 pandemic portends for the future of work. And African airlines take back to the skies as travel restrictions ease.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Well, let's now turn our attention to the future of work post-COVID. Now, the world's widely accepted model of the work week was based on industrial revolution needs. But of course, now the coronavirus pandemic has turned that model on its head. Millions now find themselves furloughed or out of a job completely due to a global economic slowdown, while others spend countless hours on conference calls with work and home life often bound together during lockdowns. Here in Africa, already struggling job markets with large informal sectors are now pressed to find solutions and find them fast. Well, let's take this all apart with Chris Karani. He's the MD of Workforce Africa, which is a HR human capital firm based here in Nairobi. Great to have you on the show with us, Mr. Karani. Now, of course, looking at the numbers from the AU, it estimates about 20 million African jobs may be lost in this pandemic. Your thoughts on the scale and, of course, the reach of this pandemic on employment, not just here in Kenya, but, of course, on the continent as a whole?
All right, thanks for having me. I think this crisis is affecting everybody. In Kenya alone, we are looking at estimates of 4 million jobs already being lost. In some specific industry like the tourism industry, we are looking at almost 100,000 jobs of people who have actually already lost their opportunities. At an Africa level, I was actually looking at labor organization report. They were saying people are going to be affected even by less earnings and underemployment, and the numbers are in the ranges of 100 million people who are going to be affected by less earnings.
Well, what are your views on what the future of work will look like? Because we seem to be heading towards a more virtual and remote environment, of course, post-pandemic. On the continent, where the informal sector is, of course, a major employer, what do you expect to see going forward?
So definitely, I think it's going to continue. We are going to have increased adoption of virtual working. And I think organizations are looking at more investments and innovation around that. Organizations are developing policies that would help them being able to support their employees to be able to work from home or work virtually. There are examples of people who are now investing more in giving employees Wi-Fi to connect at home or giving them gadgets that can actually connect. And then also, especially in the informal sector, organizations are trying much and more to adapt to the challenges that they're facing. So, for instance, I've seen examples of organizations that have shifted their shift work from maybe 2 shifts in a day to 4 shifts in a day, where they have less employees at site. So people are adapting. And I think eventually we'll see now a connection between the technical areas and the informal sectors, where platforms are going to come up. And these platforms are going to be able to now connect people to opportunities in the informal sector.
Now, undoubtedly, this digital transformation of work will be our new normal. But what's going to happen in Africa, where, of course, internet penetration levels remain low, poverty remains low? Will we see this taking over informal areas of the sector? And if so, how long do you expect that to last?
So it will definitely be there, and I think we are going to continue seeing it. So the thing is, companies in Kenya and in Africa are competing with global companies, and people have to innovate. So the rest of the world is not waiting for us. So we have to be able to use these global connections and global innovations to continue surviving. So we have to develop and to connect with these changes. The thing, however, is there is access to online resources, and I see this as twofold. There is the organizational motivation and there's the individual motivation. Organizations have to survive and be profitable and continue to thrive in these challenging times. And in the same case, individuals also have to survive because it's these platforms, some of these platforms and virtual work provide additional opportunities for earning.
Now, what for you are some of the other labor solutions specific to Africa, or rather the African job market, to thrive in this new normal? And given, of course, those funding limitations, can the government and organizations, employers on the African continent, really protect employees in this crisis? How can they do that?
So, I mean, the first flexible options we are seeing coming around is, say, for instance, the short-term labor or contract labor. So more and more organizations are going to try survive within the limits and probably within the resources that they have, and they will deploy such as short-term contract labor. The other areas is items like freelancing, for instance. So they want to access resources and they want to access good resources for that matter. And some of these solutions like freelancing provide access to talent without necessarily committing longer term. So obviously there's challenges on how to implement it, and organizations are actually working with those specific challenges to make sure they do it. But then these are some of the options, that flexible options that organizations can try. Some other organizations are also trying like internal project teams, whereas previously I would go get an organization or a group of consultants to carry for me out a project. I've seen organizations where they are raising these projects internally within the organization and actually getting those projects done. On the other hand, for the public sector, for the public sector, because of, say, for instance, funding, the employees might not be so as affected, but in some cases, which actually is already evident in some countries, we are already seeing delays for public sector employees in terms of their salaries. Some challenges could also be to the private sector in terms of delayed payments to suppliers for projects that have already been done. I mean, all this contributes to reduced product demand from different organizations, and private companies are having to deal with this. So, I mean, directly to answer your question, it might not be as easy, and public and private companies will have to try and manage within the resources that they have.
Quite right. It's certainly not an easy road ahead for all of us. But many thanks for joining us on the show, Mr. Karani. That was Chris Karani, MD of Workforce Africa, talking to us about the future of work. Well, let's move on now and head to Uganda now, where thousands of teachers are without jobs following the closure of schools in March because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many are now adjusting to the changes of life by picking up new skills in order to survive. Here's Leon Senyange telling us more.
It's been months since Ismail Lubega stood before a class. The closure of schools due to the COVID-19 pandemic put the teacher of history out of work. Without pay for months now, he has taken on another job in construction.
As a teacher, you're supposed to be very quick in thinking. You're supposed to work very fast. Because when the situation, we realize that we don't know when COVID is going to end, we realize that we can't just sit.
Lubega is not alone. With savings from their group, these teachers purchased raw materials and are now making paving stones.
We used to sit every Thursday and we collect some money, 20,000 each, and we realized that we can use this money in COVID so that we can start instead of sharing that money.
And it is already picking on. The teachers here say they learned how to make the paving stones in a few weeks. The group can now produce about 700 pavers a day. All take turns to work here, and they say they can make more pavers than they already do.
We believe that we can make even 1,000 or even 2,000, but we are limited by the machinery that we have, so it becomes really hard. Like you've seen, we are so many today, but then the machinery is lacking, so we are not making the optimum that we ought to make.
Uganda has more than 360,000 private school teachers. It's still uncertain when they will return to the classrooms. And the longer schools are closed, the more Frederick Odur worries.
The teachers who have learned some of these skills, the teachers who have earned some little money from these different jobs that they have been doing, sincerely, it will be very difficult for them to go back to class. Now, and that calls for our directors, that calls for the government to come in and support the private schools so that even the salaries of the private school teachers should be increased.
For now, the fuel cells are helping Lubega and his colleagues pay their bills. That could probably go on much longer, at least until Uganda is declared coronavirus-free. Leon Senanga, CGTN, Nsanji, Central Uganda.
You are watching Global Business Africa. We're taking a short break now, but still coming up on the show. China's economy records growth in the second quarter of 2020 despite the pandemic. And Disneyland in Paris partially reopens its doors following a 4-month closure.
Holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And now here's a quick recap of the top headlines this hour. The World Health Organization says there have been more than 100,000 new cases of COVID-19 on the continent over the past week. 3/4 of these cases have been reported in South Africa. Our infections there have surpassed the 300,000 mark, making South Africa amongst the top 10 worst affected countries globally. The increases are happening despite the early implementation of one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. Meanwhile, Tanzania says it is winning the war against the coronavirus pandemic. The government has closed about 74 of its 85 coronavirus treatment centers across the country, following claims of a significant fall in the rate of infections. And finally, Tunisian Prime Minister Elise Fakfak has tendered his resignation to President Kais Saied. The president must now choose a new candidate for Prime Minister, but Parliament is deeply fragmented amongst rival parties. A failure to build another coalition will trigger an election. And that's a recap of the top headlines this hour. Well, let's head to Senegal now. The country resumed international flights 4 months after suspending air traffic because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, an Air Algerie flight arrived at Dakar's International Airport at midnight on Tuesday, and 6 other flights were scheduled to depart and arrive the same day. According to the Ministry of Air Transport, passengers departing for Senegal are required to present proof from an approved laboratory that they have tested negative for COVID-19 within the last 7 days. The certificate has to come from a lab in the country where the trip originated.
Aujourd'hui, pour venir au Sénégal,
today, for all people who are coming to Senegal, we demand strict compliance with border measures, namely the wearing of masks. Everybody must wear a mask. You have the physical distance even at the seats where you rest. You have hydroalcoholic gels everywhere, even at the ATMs.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, the impact of the coronavirus crisis on its airline industry continues. But at least one entrepreneur sees an opportunity to launch a new South African-based airline. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with more on that.
Giron Novik, founder of Kalula and ex-CEO of Comair, says COVID-19 has turned the airline industry on its head and created a window of opportunity with equipment, facilities and people readily available.
There's an abundance of all of those in the current environment. In fact, there's an excess. And on the back of that, there's obviously an opportunity to acquire resources, both physical resources at very good prices, and also to attract, very, very good experienced talent locally to, to run a successful enterprise.
The airline industry is dollar-based when it comes to planes and fuel. That's a challenge if the local currency is weak.
And more than half of the input costs are in US dollars. The costs that are in local currency are very efficient and a very high caliber of facilities and people that are paid in rands. On the flip side, or let's say on the revenue side, it's also a mixed bag. So we obviously price in local currency, but over time, and certainly not now, with the aftermath or with the impact of COVID. Tourism is non-existent, certainly international tourism, but longer term, that's obviously a significant part of the airline business, the local airline business.
The so-called new normal will have an impact on all economic activity, including the airline industry.
Business travel will reduce. I think that's an obvious one. The kind of calls that we're on now, and millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people have been doing throughout COVID, is going to change the way that business is done and will reduce the requirement for business travel. So one can't be complacent. Many airlines in the past have really relied on business travel to keep them afloat. Business travelers pay more, they're less price sensitive, and I think that will be a lot more challenging.
It's been suggested that airlines aren't the most efficient businesses, but the new environment may lead to a change.
Airlines are a strange thing. The bigger they get, I believe, the less efficient they become. And, the idea of economies of scale, I'm not sure always applies in the airline industry. And in fact, I think you often get the opposite. So being small, being nimble, being agile, getting the timing right are very key parts of this particular business model.
While the global airline industry is in crisis, opportunities will present themselves and entrepreneurs will take advantage. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, on the international front, Chinese President Xi Jinping has pledged a better business environment and more opportunities to multinationals who are operating in the country. In a letter to representatives of the Global CEO Council, he said fundamentals of China's long-term sound economic growth remain unchanged. He also added that China will continue to implement reform and open up policy to create a better environment for international businesses. Now, the government is also expected to continue plans to boost employment and the economic sector. He reaffirmed China's pledge for peaceful and open development and expressed his gratitude for the constructive advice offered by the council members on China's economic development. Well, let's go to Beijing, where official data shows that China's economy unexpectedly expanded 3.2% in the second quarter of this year as the country continues to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the growth following a 6.8% slump in the first 3 months. The economy slowed 1.6% in the first half of the year, but major indications suggest it is now in recovery. Sonia has the details.
It's a turnaround that's exceeded market expectations. With the 3.2% growth rate in the second quarter, officials say the Chinese economy is stepping up its recovery after the unprecedented fallout from COVID-19.
Generally speaking, in the first half of the year, China's economy gradually overcame the adverse impacts of the epidemic and demonstrated steady growth and gradual recovery, further highlighting its resilience and vitality.
Liu said she's confident that growth will be sustained through the second half of the year, thanks to a strong production base, a huge domestic market, and quick policy adjustments installed in the last 6 months. However, recovery could still be uneven.
We should also be aware that some indicators are still in decline and the losses caused by the epidemic need to be recovered. Given the continuous spread of the epidemic globally, the huge impact on global economy, and the noticeably mounting external risks and challenges, domestic economic recovery is still under pressure.
Demand in the retail sector and consumption picked up more slowly than supply across industries in the last 3 months, a discrepancy some analysts attribute to a slow response to incentives. And there are other challenges, such as unemployment.
In June, the group of 20 to 24-year-olds with college degrees registered an unemployment rate of 19.3%, even though the overall job market is stable.
China is set to eradicate absolute poverty in 2020. Economic officials say more fine-tuned policies could emerge in the next few months to bolster the recovery. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, China says it will take all necessary measures to safeguard its interests in response to the UK's decision to ban Huawei from its 5G network. Now, many experts have also voiced their concerns, saying it may lead to cooling commercial relations between the two sides. Here's Andrew Wilson reporting.
Fallout from the Huawei decision is evolving at speed. The geopolitics is widespread with many players. Without all of that, Huawei's role in UK 5G might make perfect commercial sense.
The government's given huge support to the industry and encouragement to roll out. And this is the reversal of that activity. And 5G is not like the previous generations. It's what the next industrial revolution is going to be built on. So, we feel that the competitive advantage that the UK had by releasing the spectrum early and early adopters will be lost by this announcement.
Huawei UK is 20 years old. Its technology and hardware has been part of the UK system for over 15. Huawei employs 1,600 workers in the UK, tens of thousands in Europe. Alongside its telecommunications role, Huawei is a major player in UK fibre broadband, and its phones and tablets now compete for a healthy market share on the high street. Appearing at an EU think tank webinar, China's UK ambassador said Chinese businesses won't need their government to tell them what to do next.
It's very disheartening. The way you treat Huawei will be followed very closely by other Chinese businesses. When the mutual trust was undermined, it'd be difficult for the businesses to have a confidence to have a more investment.
Will the golden era be upheld?
You don't need the government to say anything. I think the business, they can make their own conclusion.
Some suggest all this might point to a gradual cooling of commercial relations rather than a sudden separation.
I think that what that might mean in practice is essentially a slowdown of a particular flow that we've seen over the last few years and even decades, which is Chinese investment in various UK projects. HS2, which is a high-speed train project the government is very keen on, could be a good example of that.
Up till now, Huawei had big plans for the UK, as well as a $5 million research project with a London university. A new $1 billion R&D centre has been approved in Cambridge. And the company is still an integral part of the UK's other networks, 4G, 3G and 2G, crucial infrastructures on which the government has yet to rule. It's a lot of momentum to suddenly pull the brakes on. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, London.
Now, despite the pressure on employment globally, especially in traditional industries, new business models are now helping to provide more job opportunities, and live streaming e-commerce is one of them. Here's CGTN's Guan Yang taking a closer look.
22-year-old Yang Zhanyu is a local live streaming celebrity in Laobian district, located near Bohai Bay. His large fan base helps him rake in money from his t-shirt sales. For many people from small towns and villages across China, live streaming is their way of climbing the social ladder.
I spend more time coaching young people, as well as those who have difficulties finding jobs, to become hosts in the live stream shopping industry. This is something anyone can try.
China's youngest workers are entering perhaps the country's toughest job market in the modern era. However, behind each of these little live streaming cameras, hiring and entrepreneurship are gaining momentum. The economy in China's northeast relies heavily on sectors like manufacturing and mining, but the young generation is breaking free from that. A large number of the most popular live streaming hosts are from here. Some say it's because of their personalities, outgoing, frank, and talkative. In Laobian, local officials have an ambitious idea for this emerging industry, to develop the area into the country's Silicon Valley for live stream shopping.
Traditional retailers are struggling in the digital age, but that doesn't mean demand is equally falling. We believe that live stream shopping can be the game changer in the labor market, as we saw it as one of the few industries that hired big amid the pandemic.
From storage and logistics to human resources and market supervision, Laobian has developed a full system around live stream shopping. In preparation for the coming 5G era, the region has invested big in infrastructure to enable hosting 16 million live streaming events simultaneously.
We think this industry needs to be regulatory driven in the long run. Both the hosts and products have to follow rules and regulations, like in the retail sector. By doing so, it can boost consumers' recognition of our district.
As live stream shopping gains popularity, it will be important to watch and learn how small townships like Laobian transform themselves, from an economy based on manufacturing to a center of services and consumer spending. Guan Yang, CGTN.
Now, Disneyland Paris is partially reopening to the public following a 4-month closure. People now are flocking into the park with their masks on. Here's Ross Cullen with the story.
Spinning around in multicolored teacups, enjoying a ride in a flying elephant, snapping a selfie with Donald Duck. This can only mean one thing: Disneyland. And in Paris, the park is open to visitors once again.
It's very emotional to come back to Disneyland Paris. It's a magical and unforgettable feeling.
We're very happy to be back here. We've been waiting for the opening for a long time. It feels good to enjoy the magic, especially right now.
So we just came off Big Thunder Mountain. It was really fun. The adrenaline, I think that's what we missed the most as well. The only place you can really do that as adults is Disneyland, so that's something that's very special for us.
Face masks are compulsory for visitors and employees, and there will be a reduced capacity at restaurants as Disney reopens the Paris park with caution.
Alors bien entendu, ce sera un peu différent.
It will obviously be a little different because we are facing a different situation, but most of the attractions will be back. Interactions with our characters will be back too, even more of them, but they've been reinvented to fit in with social distancing.
The park is hoping people will come for what it calls the Disney magic, but the company has been struggling, suffering a $1.4 billion hit to its profits in the first 3 months of the year. Like all big companies, Disney's been hit hard by the effects of the pandemic. It's added billions of dollars to its debt load, slashed executive salaries, and furloughed more than 100,000 employees worldwide as it tries to offset a huge loss in income. There have been protests by staff in the United States. They fear the company is rushing to get parks open again, despite a continuing rise in the numbers of new cases.
We want the park to open, but we want it to open safe. And right now, Disney has not assured the conditions to do that. They are resisting testing. They can't tell us details of how they're going to handle cleaning, what they're going to do if somebody gets sick.
Disney bosses are also anxious for the Paris park to avoid the hurdles that have affected other sites. Disneyland in Hong Kong has had to close again due to new infections just a month after reopening. For now, in France, visitors are excited to be back, and Disney is hoping it won't have to wave goodbye to the public again if the health situation gets worse. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Well, let's shift focus now and take a look at commodity markets. Oil prices fell today. That's after OPEC and other producers, including Russia, agreed to scale back oil production cuts from August. Nevertheless, that drop was cushioned by tightening global inventories as, of course, economic activity starts to pick up. Traders are saying that things are getting back to normal on the oil market. Meanwhile, gold prices held steady today near a nine-year peak as concerns over rising coronavirus cases and, of course, simmering tensions between the US and China did offset some silver linings from Chinese economic data. Well, let's take a short break now. Here's a look at what's still coming up. A Tunisian company has unveiled its first drone to operate in agriculture and other domains. Now, a Tunisian company has unveiled its first drone to operate in agriculture and other domains. Manufactured by a team of engineers from the Telnet group, the drone will help monitor crops and livestock as well as ensure rescue operations during floods. And as CGTN's Adnan Shaushi now reports, the drone will also play an important role in helping to reach remote parts of the Tunisian and African terrain.
Mohamed Frikha is a successful engineer and entrepreneur. The founder of Telnet Holding expressed his pride after he led a team of Tunisian technicians and successfully manufactured a drone at a local research unit.
It's the first time in Tunisia's history that an autonomous drone is 100% produced with Tunisian expertise at Telnet. It can operate in agriculture, security and enable equipment delivery to inaccessible areas and also border surveillance.
The project coordinator says this autonomous drone can fly up to 8 hours and operate 24 hours per day. It is capable of flying over a distance of 800 kilometers.
This drone weighs 50 kilograms. It can carry a 10-kilogram multi-purpose payload, including a camera and other components for distant destinations and missions.
Telnet's technical director asserts that the company plans to export the drone to the international market.
We target the international market. We'll export our products to many countries in the Middle East region, as well as African countries, where there's a huge demand for this drone, which can offer many services.
The drone is equipped with an automatic flight system, as well as remote control and anti-collision system. The research and manufacture project for the first Tunisian drone was launched at Telnet Laboratories 2 years ago. The company is now expecting the drone certification to begin the first test flights in many regions across the North African state. Adnan Shaushi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, wine tourism contributes millions of dollars to South Africa's economy. It also accounts for thousands of jobs in the country. Back in 2016, the United Nations Tourism Organization found that South Africa's wine industry is amongst the best developed in the world. But the industry has suffered massive losses since the country went into lockdown back in March. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
South Africa has grown its wine tourism industry to be one of the best in the world. But this accomplishment is being eroded with the country under lockdown.
Well, tourism industry contributes 8.6% of the total South African GDP, and it employs 1.5 million people within the value chain of tourism, of which many of them are employed directly in tourism, which is around 740,000. Impact of COVID to tourism. COVID has decimated tourism in South Africa. And the fact that now we are still under lockdown and it's over 100 days of lockdown, it means that, the tourism establishments have not received any income, because there hasn't been any movement of people.
Wine tourism on its own contributed over $423 million to the economy last year and employs over 10,000 people. Many of these jobs are being threatened by the ongoing lockdown.
The wine industry has been dealt another blow with the reinstatement of the liquor ban. While exports can continue, all domestic wine sales are banned.
We've made provisions for at least 5 to 6 months of almost zero income way back then in order to sustain ourselves and look after ourselves and still be able to pay salaries and vehicles and insurance premiums, etc. So that is what's our saving grace at this stage. We are already deep into our personal savings. We don't know how long we can continue with that. On top of that, we've got our own rents and bonds and living expenses to cover.
The Western Cape boasts the longest wine route in the world, spanning over 6 wine regions, which include 26 districts and 69 wards. Every year, thousands of local and foreign tourists make their way through the majestic vineyards. But it's still unclear when tourism will reopen in South Africa.
Since the day of lockdown at the end of March, we've had zero income. And we obviously live in limbo. There's no preset date at this stage of when the tourism industry will resume, and we can only hope that it's soon.
Farmers are hoping that the government will allow wine tourism to reopen by September in time for its peak season. Sadly, many wine farmers just won't be able to sustain themselves until then, having been closed for almost 4 months already. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand weakening today. It was on track for its first day of losses in about 3 days, as of course rising tensions between the US and China weighed on sentiment. Also, the US dollar did strengthen today amidst growth concerns and weak Chinese consumption data. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. For me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.